The photograph had been printed in newspapers across the world in the summer of 1945, hailed as a symbol of relief. A soldier in uniform, dust still clinging to his boots, stood in the foreground with a tired but victorious smile. Beside him was a woman, her hair neatly pinned, her expression calm, almost warm, as if the chaos of the war had somehow passed her by. People said the image captured the exact moment humanity exhaled. For decades, the photo lived quietly in archives and history books, unchallenged and unquestioned. It was framed in museums, labeled with a simple caption, "End of war, unknown civilians." No one asked who the woman was. No one needed to. She was just part of the background, a comforting presence in a world desperate for closure. It wasn't until the image was scanned at extreme resolution, nearly 80 years later, that the unease began. At first, it was nothing more than a technical adjustment. Contrast corrected, grain removed. Then the intern restoring the image paused, fingers hovering over the screen. The woman's smile didn't behave like the soldier's. It didn't soften when enlarged. It sharpened. Her eyes, once thought gentle, seemed fixed on something beyond the camera, beyond the crowd, focused with intent. When the zoom went deeper, a detail emerged that had never appeared in any print. Reflected in the woman's pupils was not the cheering street, but a dark, unmistakable shape behind the soldier. Something close, something waiting. The photo had always been about the end of a war, but suddenly, it looked more like the beginning of something else. The photograph emerged quietly, almost accidentally, during a routine digitization of wartime archives that had been boxed away since the late 1940s. It was one of thousands taken in the final weeks of World War II, when streets filled with soldiers, civilians, and a fragile sense of relief that no one quite trusted yet. At first glance, there was nothing remarkable about it. A young soldier stood near the center of the frame, uniform slightly rumpled, his smile thin but genuine in the way only exhaustion can shape. Beside him stood a woman, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, her posture composed, her expression serene. The photo radiated calm, and that calm was exactly why it had survived in 1945. Editors were desperate for images that suggested the world could return to something resembling normal life. This photograph was printed in several regional newspapers, always cropped slightly differently, but always preserving the same pairing. The soldier was unnamed, listed simply as returning infantry, while the woman was labeled a civilian passerby. Readers didn't question it. They saw what they needed to see: victory without triumph, peace without explanation. In homes still haunted by telegrams and folded flags, the image became a quiet reassurance that survival was possible. Over the decades, the photograph gained a gentle reputation among historians. It appeared in textbooks, documentaries, and anniversary retrospectives as an example of post-war atmosphere rather than historical fact. No one studied it closely because it didn't demand attention. Unlike images of destruction or surrender, it offered no narrative conflict. It was a pause between horrors, a visual breath. The woman's presence was often described as symbolic, a stand-in for the civilian world welcoming soldiers back from chaos. What made the image endure was its emotional neutrality. There was no visible grief, no celebration, no context that tied it to a specific place or event. That ambiguity allowed viewers to project their own stories onto it. Some believed the woman was the soldier's wife or sister. Others imagined she was a stranger caught in the frame at just the right moment. None of those assumptions were ever verified, and no records were searched to confirm them. The photo didn't seem to require answers. By the time it resurfaced in the digital archive, it was considered complete, finished, and understood. Its meaning had been settled by repetition rather than examination. It was cataloged, tagged, and praised for its quiet humanity, never suspecting that the very reason it had been overlooked for so long was because everyone agreed it was harmless. The rediscovery of the photograph might have ended as a footnote, if not for the restoration process itself, which demanded a level of scrutiny the image had never faced before. The archivist assigned to the project was not looking for secrets or symbolism, only damage. The original print had suffered decades of fading, chemical stains along the edges, and a network of fine cracks that threatened to erase details entirely. To preserve it, the image was scanned at an ultra-high resolution far beyond what the human eye could perceive in 1945. As the software reconstructed missing fragments, subtle inconsistencies began to surface. The soldier's features behaved as expected under magnification, the lines of his face softening into familiar grain patterns. The woman beside him, however, responded differently. When the archivist increased the zoom to correct a distortion near her mouth, her smile appeared to hold its shape too precisely, resisting the blur that usually accompanied such enlargement. It was as if the expression had been etched rather than captured in passing. Curiosity replaced routine. The archivist isolated the woman's face, adjusting lighting values and contrast to better understand the anomaly. That was when the unease took hold. Her eyes, previously unremarkable, now carried a clarity that felt intentional. They were not relaxed in the way of someone sharing a public moment, nor did they mirror the soldier's wary relief. Instead, they seemed fixed, alert, and directed at something beyond the lens, something the rest of the frame did not acknowledge. At first, the sensation was dismissed as projection, a byproduct of staring too long at a single image. Yet every technical adjustment reinforced the same impression. Noise reduction made the soldier look more human, more vulnerable, while the woman's features grew sharper, more defined, as though the photograph had prioritized her presence over everything else. Even the grain clustered differently around her face, forming unnatural patterns that did not match the surrounding area. The archivist saved multiple versions of the restoration, hoping a comparison would resolve the discomfort. It did not. Each iteration intensified the same quiet disturbance. The woman's smile no longer felt warm or neutral. It appeared controlled, deliberate, as if it were meant to be seen exactly as it was and no other way. The longer the image remained on screen, the harder it became to believe she was simply a passerby caught by chance. What had once been a symbol of peace now carried a subtle tension, a sense that something within the frame was aware of being observed, and that the act of looking closer was not uncovering history but awakening it. The moment the archivist decided to examine the image at its deepest magnification, the photograph stopped behaving like a record of the past and began to feel like a warning. At extreme zoom, the familiar shapes dissolved into a landscape of grain and shadow. Each speck of silver halide enlarged until it resembled terrain rather than texture. It was here, within this abstract field, that the detail first appeared, so faint it could have been dismissed as a flaw if it hadn't repeated itself across multiple scans. Within the reflection of the woman's eyes, a shape emerged that did not align with the surrounding light. It was darker than the shadows cast by nearby buildings, and too defined to be a chemical artifact. The archivist overlaid reference images of street scenes from the same day, searching for a match, but none accounted for what was visible. The shape had edges, depth, and a proximity that suggested it was close to the soldier's back, just beyond the camera's field of view. Further enhancement clarified the impossibility of it. The angle of the reflection indicated that whatever was captured in the woman's eyes was positioned behind the soldier. not in front of him where the crowd and photographer stood. This contradicted every known account of the photograph's setting. There should have been nothing there but open space and sunlight. Yet the reflection insisted otherwise, showing a vertical form that seemed to lean inward, as if drawn toward the man beside her. As the image was sharpened, the form gained definition. It was not human, or at least not entirely. Its outline suggested a silhouette that mimicked a person's posture while lacking any identifiable features. No face, no uniform, no movement frozen in time. Just a presence, tall and close, occupying a space that history claimed was empty. The archivist cross-checked other prints from the same negative, hoping to find a version where the anomaly disappeared. It did not. Each copy revealed the same shape, consistent in size and position, immune to explanation. The realization brought a colder fear than disbelief. If the reflection was accurate, then the woman had not been looking at the photographer or the crowd celebrating behind him. She had been looking past the soldier, directly at whatever stood there. Her calm expression, once comforting, now seemed measured, almost knowing, as though she were aware of something unfolding that the soldier could not perceive. What unsettled the archivist most was the implication of timing. Reflections capture what exists in the same instant as the image itself. That meant the shape was present at the moment the shutter clicked, standing close enough to be seen, close enough to be acknowledged, and close enough to suggest that the photograph had recorded more than memory had allowed anyone to notice. Once the anomaly was documented, the archivist attempted to ground the discovery in something solid, something bureaucratic and safe. The soldier became the obvious anchor. His uniform markings, once overlooked, were enhanced and compared against military records. At first, the search produced a likely match. A serviceman discharged in late 1945, his unit stationed near the city, where the photograph was taken. But when the archivist requested the full file, parts of it were missing. Not damaged, not redacted, simply absent, as if they had never been filed at all. Digging deeper only widened the gap. Morning reports listed the soldier as present on the day the photograph was taken, but casualty summaries from the same week told a different story. A name similar enough to raise concern appeared in a separate registry, marked as killed in an incident that allegedly occurred miles away and days earlier. The dates didn't align, and neither did the locations. It was as though two incompatible outcomes had been recorded for the same person, and no one had ever reconciled them. The archivist contacted a military historian for clarification, framing the inquiry as a routine verification. The response was delayed, cautious, and strangely incomplete. Certain unit logs from that period had been reorganized decades earlier, according to the historian, often due to clerical errors or consolidation efforts. When pressed about this specific soldier, the historian went quiet, later replying that the file could not be discussed further without formal clearance that no longer existed. At the same time, an unsettling pattern began to surface. Searching through unrelated archives, the archivist encountered other photographs from different cities and different years, each depicting a returning soldier captured in a moment of relief. In several of them, a woman stood nearby, never the focal point, always unnamed. The resemblance was subtle but undeniable. The same composed posture, the same calm smile, and when those images were enlarged, the same unnatural clarity in her eyes. Referencing the soldiers in those photographs produced a similar result. Records that contradicted themselves. Service histories that ended abruptly or diverged into parallel accounts. Men officially listed as having survived the war, yet absent from post-war census data, marriage records, or death certificates. It was as if they had stepped out of history, Immediately after being seen, the archivist began to understand that the original photograph was not an isolated curiosity, but part of a larger omission, one that suggested the image did not commemorate survival at all, but marked a moment just before disappearance. The final realization did not arrive all at once, but assembled itself slowly, like a pattern emerging from fog. When the archivist placed the photographs side by side, stripped of their captions and dates, the repetition became undeniable. The woman did not age. Across decades of images, her features remained fixed, untouched by time or fashion beyond minor variations that felt intentional rather than natural. Hairstyles changed just enough to belong to each era. Clothing adjusted to local styles, yet her face persisted with the same composed calm, the same knowing smile that never quite reached her eyes. What bound the images together was not just her presence but the timing. Each photograph captured a moment of perceived survival, soldiers returning, men believed to have escaped death by chance or fortune. And yet, in every case where records could be traced far enough, those men vanished from documented life shortly afterward. They did not die publicly or heroically. They faded. No obituaries, no descendants, no graves. History recorded them as having lived, but offered no proof that they ever continued to do so. The woman's role began to feel less like coincidence and more like ceremony. She was never touching the soldiers, never acknowledged by them, yet always close enough to be mistaken for part of their world. Her gaze, when examined closely, was never directed at the camera or the crowd. It was always angled slightly inward, toward the man beside her, or toward the space just behind him, where the reflection suggested another presence lingered. The archivist began to suspect that the photograph itself was not the event, but the record of a passage. In this framing, the woman was not a companion, but a marker, appearing at the threshold between survival and erasure. The soldiers believed they had returned, that they had been spared. The world believed it too, printing their smiles as proof. But something else had already claimed them. Something the camera captured without revealing outright. The reflection in her eyes was no longer just a shadow, but a witness to a transfer that could not be seen directly. The most unsettling implication was intentionality. These images were taken in public spaces, surrounded by people, yet no one ever noticed the woman in the moment. She existed only in retrospect, revealed by technology that did not exist when the photographs were made. It suggested that whatever she represented was not meant to be confronted, only archived, waiting for a future capable of seeing what the present could not. By the time the archivist finished assembling the evidence, the original photograph no longer felt like a symbol of peace, but like a quiet inventory, a record of souls counted at the moment they believed the war had finally let them go. The archivist planned to publish the findings, to let the evidence speak and allow others to decide what it meant. But before anything could be released, the archive's internal system began flagging errors. Files related to the photographs failed to load. Cross-referenced records returned empty fields. It was not a deletion in the ordinary sense. The data still existed, but it refused to be accessed, as if the act of assembling the story had triggered a quiet resistance. Late one night, alone in the restoration room, the archivist reopened the original 1945 image. The woman's face filled the screen, clearer than ever. Something had changed. Her smile was no longer merely composed. It carried expectation. The archivist felt a sudden, irrational certainty that the photograph was no longer a window into the past, but a surface that had grown thin. A reflection appeared in the glass of the monitor. Not the archivist's own, but a darker outline standing just behind them. When they turned, there was nothing there. When they looked back at the screen, The soldier was gone from the image entirely. Only the woman remained, standing alone in the street, her eyes no longer reflecting a shadow, but the room itself. The archivist understood then that the photographs were not passive records, but invitations. They did not steal lives violently or suddenly. They waited until someone saw too much, until someone traced the pattern and completed it. The soldiers had been taken because they were already half gone, suspended between death and survival, easy to claim without notice. The archivist, having followed them across decades, had stepped into the same threshold. The next morning, co-workers noticed an odd inconsistency in the system. The project log listed the restoration as completed by a name that did not belong to anyone currently employed. Security footage from the night before showed an empty chair facing a glowing monitor, the screen displaying a single black and white photograph. In it stood a smiling woman beside a figure just out of frame, her calm expression unchanged, as if waiting for the shutter to click once more.